Hey, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for this session today entitled On Cultivating a Daily Writing Discipline. We're very happy that you could be with us here today as part of the 1455 Summer Festival hosted by 1455 Literary Arts. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the founding director of 1455. And one of the great pleasures of my role is that throughout the year, figuring out the programming, I just have the opportunity to talk to a number of experts in the literary and artistic fields, ranging from, of course, poets and writers and novelists to agents and editors and storytellers of all sorts. And so even when I'm working on one program, I'm always kind of thinking about the next program and enjoying the process of putting experts in one room so they can drop their knowledge and share their experience. So the purpose of this festival, of course, is to celebrate storytelling and really take a deeper dive into what goes on behind the scenes. So I've been looking very forward to this conversation. I've had the opportunity to talk in some detail with all three of these experts and authors, and I've really been looking forward to the opportunity to get everyone in the same room at the same time. So my goal is to be brief. I've got some questions prepared, but I want us all to hear and learn from these very passionate and knowledgeable experts. So let me introduce them one at a time, and then we'll jump in. I will start with Ron Hogan. Ron is a writer and editorial consultant, and he helps writers develop an ongoing writing practice as an end in and of itself, not a means to publication. He's been an industry analyst for a media website, a digital marketing director for a publishing house, a freelance book reviewer, and an acquiring editor for a startup book publisher. He's also founder of the literary site Beatrice and creator of a popular newsletter about developing your writing practice, brilliantly titled Destroy Your Safe and Happy Lives. You can learn more at beatrice.com, and I'll make sure I put links to all of these websites in the chat before we finish. In the middle is Lisa Tenner. She's awarded the Silver Stevie for Mentor Coach of the Year, and she's an inspiring book writing and publishing coach, entrepreneur, and speaker. She has helped visionaries, experts, creatives, therapists, and people from all walks of life to access their juiciest ideas, write in a state of flow, and do their finest work. As a book coach, Lisa helps with all aspects of book writing and has specialized expertise with helping authors write successful book proposals. You can learn a lot more at lisatenner.com. And not least, Justen Ahren. Justen is Martha's Vineyard's poet laureate and founder of the Italy Writing Retreat. In 2007, after returning from a residency in Costa Rica, he founded and directed the Martha's Vineyard Writers Residency, which then became the very popular and beloved Noete Center for Literary Arts in 2013. Justen is the author of 2 books of poetry, and his work is currently on exhibit at Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. Thanks all of you for being here. And I just want to start by saying I have already learned so much from each of you and reading your work, attending your workshops, seeing what you do. So I know there's going to be a lot to get through today. I think the title of this panel is self-explanatory. Your bios speak quite eloquently, but I'll set the tone by suggesting that this discussion is critical and applies to everyone, not just novice and writers trying to figure out how to cultivate a craft. I think it's equally important for published writers, because one thing I hear repeatedly in these conversations I have is that each time someone starts a new project, it's starting over. And people need to be reminded of why they started doing this or how they can do it more effectively, and getting that encouragement, because as I think we'll establish today, there's no one fit model that you can just plug and play and repeat ad infinitum. Writing itself can be very confounding, and it kind of requires the sorts of discipline and routines that you all become experts at talking about. So I think it would be appropriate to just start off. We could go around the horn in the order of who was introduced, and you can just talk a little bit about, why you are championing this notion of a daily practice and what you've learned and what you try to teach people.
Sure. And I guess that would make me the first one.
Ron,
So,
you go first. Enter the fray.
Yeah. So for me, a big part of it is that, when you look at the statistics and the data about the publishing industry, realistically, very few people make a living full-time as a writer. It is not impossible. And I always stress that when I talk to people about this, that it's like, I'm not saying don't have this dream. Have this dream, but realize that it's an uphill battle. It's it's a tough field. And so much of it depends on things that are outside your control. But what is in your control is the writing itself. That you have the power to choose every day, or whenever you can find the time to do it. You can choose to write, and you can. If you're not writing immediately towards the goal of publication or fame or fortune, both of which are much more easily obtained in so many other fields besides writing. What is your purpose then? And for me, I think it's, you're writing to learn something about yourself. And ultimately that thing is, you're learning what matters to you. What is important to you? What is the thing that compels you to want to share it with the rest of the world? And you're, by writing every day, you get closer to finding out what that is, and closer to developing the skills to be able to tell it to other people more effectively.
Right on. Thank you for that. Lisa, what do you say?
Well, a couple things, one is, and that was beautifully said, Ron. So in some ways, I think you said it all, but I'll try to add to that. Either you have momentum in writing, momentum to write, or momentum in not writing. And so in many ways, that's the choice. And I don't write every day, but I do notice that in the times when I am writing every day, or when I've scheduled it in, so I'm writing almost every day, there's so much momentum, and there's so much ease, and there is so much exploration in that, like Ron described. And in those times when I have the momentum to not write, which are fewer and further between now, but they happen, it continues, that momentum, and you really have to get over it. And the way to get over it is with a daily practice, or as close to a daily practice as you can. And I'm sure we'll get into sort of how to do that later. But what I find is that when you start your day with it, and I love to start with my dreams and just writing down what I remember of my dreams, or what strikes me on waking, and just exploring there. And it can take you to so many interesting places, and then just lead into other writing. So for me, that's a way to, and then I'm not having to decide, like, when am I going to write today, or am I going to write today, because it just happens the very first thing before I ever leave the bed. So I have a lot of journals at the side of my bed, because sometimes they come into my office so that I can transcribe things. And I realize, oh, now my journal's not on the side of my bed. So now I have a lot of extra ones sitting there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Justen, before you go, I'll just say, already we see a theme emerging here, right? Which is, the daily practice. It's like those words have meanings, and it's incorporating this into your daily life. Justen, I know you've got a lot of deep thoughts all around these issues.
Well, I champion it because it changed my life, and I want to share that with others, because I in a sense, I teach what I most need to know and to remember, and it be inspired by on a daily basis. So kind of what Ron said, writing for me on a daily as a daily practice has really helped me find what compels me as a creative person. I had the great fortune about 10, 12 years ago to have a wonderful friend and teacher and mentor who challenged me to write every day. That's how I got started on it. And he, was quite direct with me. I guess I had been, we would have breakfasts periodically, and I think I was complaining about my lack of writing, and that if I didn't have this job, I would write, and if I wasn't doing this, I'd be writing. And he said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to write every day. And if you can't do it, then give it up. It's a fantasy. And that, I think I needed that kind of chat. Like, then I was like, okay, I'm going to prove to you, right? And so that launched me. But the discoveries that I made have really just the momentum. You talked about momentum, Lisa. The momentum and the connection I felt before that. I felt like I was such a frustrated creator. I was always doing things in fits and starts, and I never kind of could see things through. And so my experience was just one of being frustrated as an artist until, I got that momentum going. And then it changed a lot of things for me. It helped me know what I wanted to, what I wanted to do with my life, to realize some of the dreams that I had, like starting the Italy writing workshop was really, that's something that came out of my daily writing practice. So I would say for me, it changed my life, and I want to share that with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Justen,
Thank you, all of you, for that. For me, I think it also helps maybe frame the discussion. We could talk all day and all night about the disservice, like, say, movies and popular culture have done in terms of depicting like the inner life of a writer or the process. But one thing I've always found fascinating, and I'm pretty sure this might have come up in our previous discussion, Ron and Lisa, but the notion of just the average person, I think, if you conjure up, say, a concert violinist or an athlete, not even a pro athlete, just an athlete, you immediately think about, oh gosh, that takes so much practice, that takes so much repetition. And for some reason, for some reasons, some of them are benevolent, and innocuous, but I think some of them are very unhelpful. We tend to think of like the Mozart, they're just the chosen few that channel the muse. And of course there's elements of that when we're in a groove, but I think it's really important to, really bring things down to earth. And I think it's very empowering for writers of all levels to remember to do anything well requires a considerable amount of time. And even once you've been doing it well, we're talking about this kind of funnel of repetition for inspiration, but also practice. Even the best athletes and musicians and craftspeople are practicing all the time. I don't know if we need to belabor that, but I think it's important to really bring things down to, like, let's get down to brass tacks. Like, this is work, and it's as important and difficult work as any craft.
right. There's the whole Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours concept.
Yeah.
And a lot of it boils down to committing to those 10,000 hours or however many hours it is. And Justen raised a really good point when he was talking about how, his mentor pushed him to say, like, oh, you say you have all this stuff going on, you find time to write. The world is very good at finding other things for us to do besides write or be creative. Some of which are more genuinely compelling than others. I mean, like, I'm not knocking, like, I'm not saying, like, ignore your family, quit your job. I'm not saying you do have to make time for that. But when it comes down to things like, say, oh, or like, such and such is on TV, I could watch that, and you're not going to find the momentum unless you're very disciplined and if you're the type of person who can, like, say, like, I'm going to turn the TV on, I am going to watch this one show, and then I am going to turn it off, and I'm going to write. Most people, and I include myself in this, that takes a lot of discipline, and most people fall short of. I mean, any number of times I will say, like, oh, I'm going to watch this. And then as soon as it's over, it's like, oh, let's see what else is on. Let's get sucked into like a 5-hour marathon of, like, reality shows or
Sure.
something like that. And then the next thing you know, you've wasted an entire afternoon or evening that could have been spent writing. Yeah, and there are so many other moments during the day, similar moments, where you can make the choice to write or not to write. And you just have to choose to write.
Lisa?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking when you were speaking, Sean, is just about the emotional difficulty of the practice, right? It's not all, it doesn't all just to shower down on you from heaven. There are times where it does, and there are times where you're struggling, and there are times where you're excited about what you wrote, and then the next day you hate it, or there are times you hate it right away, but maybe you decide later there's something salvageable there. And so it can be a real roller coaster, but guaranteed you're going to have ups and downs. And so the part of the commitment is that resilience that I think we have to cultivate over time. And I do think often the older we get, the better we get at that. But the more we do it, right? You're talking about practice, practice, practice. That in itself creates some resilience and ability to manage those emotions that are difficult.
Right.
Yeah, I think the key word too, and the title being in the title of this, our conversation, and what we all do, and we've said it already, each of us has already said, cultivate. The word itself is to grow, it implies growing something. It implies preparing the soil for those seeds to germinate, to grow. And so I think, the difficulties of a practice of writing, of doing anything, part of this is the cultivation of being with ourselves. And I think to be patient with ourselves, also to take the time, like if we can only write, like I tell people, don't set a goal of trying to write an hour a day or 4 hours a day, like write for 5 minutes a day. Because as soon as you don't meet that goal of the hour a day, you might get frustrated with yourself or just kind of fall back on, oh, I can't do this, I'm not a writer. If that's what's going on in your head, we all have a different voice that's saying different things about that. But so I always just, the cultivation for me is really kind of it, and it changes to based on our commitments, our responsibilities, our jobs, our our families. There's always something kind of that can pull at our time. And so the cultivation is really about, how do we sustain ourselves as writers? How do we prepare this ground so that we can find that creative time? And then the second part of the cultivation is cultivating being with ourselves through the discomfort, through the elation, all of the things that emotionally come up for us as right while we're in that process. And I always also go back to when we sit to make, all we are there to do is honor that moment of creation. We're not there to publish a book. We're not there to write the whole book. We're there to be with that and honor that moment and kind of be alive in that moment. And that's what we need to pay attention to, just being alive with ourselves at that time. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is.
I think what each of you just articulated, and why I'm so happy and honored to be able to have this conversation with you, is, I mentioned practice, I mentioned the dedication, and we're kind of hammering that home. But what's coming through and what each of you, and having dived deeply into each of your works, I know that exists there, and encourage everyone to check it out for that inspiration, is this balance. It's also self-care. And the artist can't thrive if the human being isn't thriving. It's like, some of these things are so profound and yet simple. But what you just said, Justen, really resonates. This notion of, why set a goal that you might not reach? Like, that's self-censorship and self-critique. Set goals you can reach, and then use that momentum. So I think it's a very encouraging, affirmative enterprise, which gets away from kind of the shallow extremes of, you got to put in the 10,000 hours, or it's going to channel down from heaven. Like, the reality is right in the middle of these two poles. I said we're going to take a deeper dive. I've got a quote from each of you that I'd love to read and just have you riff on, because I think it illuminates, I hope, each of your kind of sensibilities and how you're attacking. We are talking about a very recurring theme, but I think each of you have your unique individual kind of approach. I'll start with Ron, and set it up just by saying, obviously with no shortage, right, of manuals that exist today, many of which might be very genuine. I think some of are very opportunistic, but how to publish, how to market, how to brand, how to find audience. There's something really refreshing in its simplicity of this quote of yours, Ron, that I love, which is writing should be an end in itself for more people, period. Elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that's a real kind of Zen cone of like, let's break it down to the most fundamental impulse.
Yeah. There's an example that I use in the book and that we talked about the last time you and me and Lisa got together. If you are a sketch artist, for example, or you like watercolors and you do that, or, say you want to learn to play the guitar and you start doing that, or the violin or whatever instrument it is, there's no necessary expectation on the part of everybody around you that like, oh, if you pick up a guitar, you're going to be touring in stadiums like, within a couple of years, or, if you start picking up the watercolors, you're going to have an exhibition in a major gallery soon. But with writing, you tell people you're a writer, and what's the first thing they ask you? Where have you been published?
Right.
Yeah. And I think we need to, I just think we need to sort of step back from that and look at the writing as you said, quoting me, I guess, an end into itself. It's like, we are writing because it's a creative thing, that it teaches us something about ourselves and about the world. And we should linger, we should sit with that part of the process before we decide whether or not to like pursue the sort of more material notions of success. We should sit with those like sort of more existential markers of success for writing. Like, have I created something interesting? Have I come up with something to share with people?
Yeah, and I'll just add before I go to Lisa's quote, this is not trivial either, right? Like, I've had the opportunity, I'm sure we all have, to talk to successful writers, and it's important to disabuse maybe the younger or less experienced amongst us that the key to happiness is not publication. Of course, I don't think any of us envy the healthy writers among us, want all of us to succeed, but publication in and of itself can not only not bring satisfaction, it gets back to what I was saying at the outset, which is you still have to teach yourself over and over again. So if there's not joy in the process, it's going to be a pretty hollow endeavor, even if you're successful. And Ron, I think you do a great job of really breaking down, I think, what's a very kind of Western sensibility in terms of how we immediately assign levels of success to ourselves. Lisa, I just want to emphasize the key word from your book title, which is joy. We hear so much about writers and the drudgery of producing quality work. You make a really compelling case in your book and in your talks about when this is done with pure intent, writing can and should involve considerable enjoyment. But just elaborate a little bit on that, because I think if someone saw that on the page, hopefully they would be very compelled to see more. But I can appreciate a cynic might say, yeah, the joy of writing, but you really make a very compelling case about how, in getting back to the lifestyle, this isn't just the art and joy of writing. This is how this can bring a deeper satisfaction.
Yeah, sometimes like in the summer, we have to pick a lot of berries. We have a lot of raspberries and blueberries here, and there are these Asian fruit flies that get in them. Once they get in, they destroy the whole crop. So you have to really keep up with it. And so it becomes this repetitive task and kind of mindless in a way. And before I go to bed at night, sometimes I'll like see myself sort of reaching for the berry and seeing like the darkness between the leaves and the redness of the berry. And it feels very, there's an intensity to that like feeling one with the task in a way, and one with the berry and all of that. But when you write about those experiences, they become more and more and more meaningful. So instead of just rushing through, which I come from New York, from Queens, we're big rushers in my family. We eat fast, we talk fast. And when we don't stop, then we really don't get to relish our lives. We just get to move through them. And so writing is such a tool for really relishing and experiencing. And I went to one of my favorite places the other day. It's Kinney Azalea Garden. And I hadn't really been there much when the azaleas or the rhododendrons are not in bloom anymore. And I found a little spot. They weren't mostly in bloom anymore. And I was amazed at, in this little corner where I was sort of surrounded by azaleas and rhododendrons that were no longer in bloom, the diversity of flowers and just weeds that I could, some of which I could identify now, and insects, and the sounds of the birds and the sound of the traffic. As we just kind of sink in to what's around us and the moment, it's kind of remarkable how much is there. And I wrote for maybe an hour, and I realized it was really all description. There was no plot. And there's something to be said about those times we really take for no plot, right? And just being, but being with whatever is around us and within us and what wants to come forth. And, that writing may never see the light of day beside me, or maybe I'll be going through it and find a place for it to share it. But at some level, it really doesn't matter, right? Because it really is about receiving the generosity that life has to offer us. And I think when we write, there is that opportunity, and it's not all, beautiful all the time either, right? Sometimes we're writing about things that are hard, but I think we might not always find the joy in it, but I think we will find the beauty and the gift and the life impulse that's in every experience.
So I'm smiling for two reasons. One, I adore all of that, and I'm so inspired by it. But I also know that is, you are speaking Justin's language. So I'm going to read his quote, but I'll also let him, because Justen, among many of his amazing attributes that I admire, is so in touch with our world around us, and is so able to channel this balance of being at a desk and doing something, very insular, but being really in touch with like nature and responding to those vibrations. But Justin, if I may, I'm just going to read a quote, and then you can riff on whatever you want. But
this is a fun game.
Yeah, I
don't know what's going to happen.
I think this is actually what Lisa just says is a good setup for this quote, because I think this is crystallizing some of what we're talking about, which is, at some point, what we are creating moves beyond our original dream. It moves beyond the page and beyond what we thought we were capable of creating. It becomes a life all its own. That's a very Arenian quote. I think that really distills, your kind of philosophy of really taking the craft so seriously, but also finding the spiritual enrichment in it, as well as the artistic uplift.
This will take me maybe down a little sidetrack, perhaps, from the cultivation, but I think just thinking about that practice of the writing, of just being with ourselves, what making requires of us, and when we attend to that daily, we can't help but go on a journey. That thing that we're making and working with and thinking and feeling, it's moving us, and it's moving us daily. We're there with it daily, to be moved with it and by it, especially on a project that is larger. If we're, say, working on a collection of something or a book. My experience has been that work does work on us. we're working it and it is working us. And I think that's what I mean by that quote. It moves beyond, really. And I think also it goes back to the cultivation. I think I have a quote that was from a recent newsletter, I believe. And there's a quote at the beginning of that newsletter that's, sow your seeds. It's from Ecclesiastes. I might not have it exactly right, but it's like, sow your seeds daily or whatever. You never know what will grow, and then perhaps it all will. And so while we're at work and we're again honoring, going back to what I had said before about honoring that moment of creation that we are in, just being open to the possibilities, to the dreams that we're having, the dreams that are coming through us. And then these things, they move beyond us when we make them concrete outside of us. We give birth to them and now they're on the page, or now they're a song, or now they're an image. They move beyond us and they have a life, and that life carries on. Other people may encounter that. They may have feelings, thoughts. They may, approach us about it, have a conversation about it. So I think that's what I'm kind of getting to as well at the end, is these things move beyond us. Once they live through us, they have another life.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
Please, absolutely.
So, Justin, when you say that, it makes me think about too, coming back to the practice keeps us open to what is there for us. And when you spoke of the dreams, I think that's such a perfect example. If we keep practicing, we keep receiving those gifts of life around us and the dreams that come to us and things that happen through us and to us. But if we don't make the space for that practice, the next day, we're not going to remember that. So that's another really great reason to be practicing every day or close to every day, because then you're there for all those gifts.
Yeah. And you said, oh, go ahead, Ron. No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, and circling back to something Lisa said, I feel like, let's say there's three major components of writing. And the first two, I think, are the ones that Lisa hit upon, are noticing and contemplating. That's like, you have to notice what is around you or within you, and you have to take the time to contemplate that and consider it. And then the third component, which I would say is like translating that, like figuring out how to take what you've noticed and what you've contemplated and turn it into words on a page. But it all starts with that ability to actually observe what is around and be able to discern what matters to you, what speaks to you, what compels you in it.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting from what all three of you are articulating so beautifully is, even if we kind of accept, and I think it's a very fair, whether it's Gladwell or anyone that talks about, the dedication and the practice, even if we accept that you do it for 10,000 hours, you're definitely going to develop a craft. I'm willing to say, sure, that's a baseline. But what I think we're really talking about here is it's a lifestyle. So even when you're not writing, you're tending to that craft and you're incorporating these ways of observing, these ways of preserving moments that you may reflect upon. But I think what I'm at pains to really underscore here, and maybe this is for the more experienced writers who, because again, for me, I find myself hearing people that I would maybe assume in terms of achievement, which, we would agree is not the way to measure this life, but you'd think that's a pretty evolved, successful person. And there's not a lot of joy or the rabbit, they keep chasing this rabbit of achievement. We really are talking about a lifestyle that enhances the art, and then the art's enhanced because the person is more productive. But what I've gotten from each of you is that there's been a point in your lives where you've actually kind of fallen, or you continue to fall back in love with the whole process of writing and all that entails, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? The messiness, the insecurity. But I think what we're not talking about is this hippy dippy, like you just got to love the work, but it's more, you accept that you're not in control, but you do your best to control, and it becomes a little zen.
Yeah, I mean, the work is painful and frustrating on any number of occasions. you mentioned Zen, and one of the metaphors that I use is this idea that it's like writing is not going to bring you instant enlightenment. You're not going to be sitting there, you're sitting at the computer or with the pad of paper in your hand or whatever, and suddenly have this flash of insight. At best, it prepares you, it keeps you open and receptive so that could happen over time. But in the same way that, let's say if you're meditating, there are days when you're going to be sitting there and your knees are going to be like, in miserable agony, and you're going to be frustrated. If you are working out, if you have like an exercise or a weightlifting routine, there are days you're going to be sore and it's not going to feel like it's doing much good for you, but it's actually doing something good for you. It is an ongoing process, and it's not shiny happy all the time, but it's shiny happy often enough that it's worth it.
Well, and I think what we're also kind of talking about, right? And maybe this would be frightening for the younger writer that's looking for assurance, is that it is a life. It's likely to be a lifelong quest, right? The notion of you're chasing the white whale of creativity. It shouldn't be something that has a first half and a second half, and then when the game's over. I think we at some point, all of us writers that are in it for the long haul recognize that it is a quest of sorts, and that it's liberating. At least I'll speak for myself. When I recognize that this was likely to be a journey with ups and downs and rejection and solitude and the joy, I found that liberating, because not knowing that there wasn't an answer means that different things will work for different people. And there's different levels of how you engage and feel like you're doing the work that you want to do. Well, how about this? So for the cynics amongst us, or the more recalcitrant, potential converts, what are some obstacles that you three hear about in your workshops and your discussions? And what are some, other than what we've already discussed, which I think has been very practical and helpful, but what are some kind of shortcuts? Like, for instance, Lisa, I know you're a big fan of prompts, and your book specifically gives those prompts. But maybe riff a little bit on, what you do when you encounter people that really maybe want to figure this out, but they're so in their routines that it's difficult for them to let go of some of this stuff.
Yeah. So, I'll show my book here. Joy of Writing Journal. Spark your creativity in 8 minutes a day. So I wrote it. I mean, it's sort of initial idea just sort of did feel a little bit like a download, and then all came the work right after that initial download. But as I wrote it, it became really clear to me that it was a lot of it a response to what I hear so much. I don't have time, so we're saying in 8 minutes a day, right? You have that much, and as I said earlier, if you start with the writing, it really helps, because then you're not having to make that decision all the time. When am I going to write? It's just like start with it, and you're in that kind of liminal space, so it that helps too. But then I don't have the time, right? We all hear that. I'm sorry, that was what I was saying. We don't have the time. But then I don't know what to write, or so prompts are nice because it gives you something to write, and it frees you, it gives you just enough structure that you have something to work from. And I found myself, it was sort of interesting. So a lot of the prompts, I'm trying to find one now. I have people list, I ask a question, have them list like 5 things or 10 things that relate to the prompt, and then give the prompt, and they can just pick one or pick a few of them to combine them in interesting ways. But what I found for myself was sometimes I would do that list, and then I'd read the prompt and I do something a little bit different. So even though I wrote that book, it's a starting place, and it doesn't even matter whether you do what it says or not, it will give you something to work from. So it really brings a lot of ease into the practice. And I think for anybody who wants to develop a habit, just having that ease, and it doesn't take much, can be such a powerful motivator. So, we sort of seduce them into it without them knowing about how difficult it can be later. But there can be a lot of ease if you give yourself enough tools, I guess, to create that ease.
Yeah. I think like one really interesting prompt that I like if you're feeling stuck and not sure how to move forward as a writer, is there's this exercise that I learned years ago from a writer named Robert Anton Wilson, to basically say, like, to start with the question of like, why am I here? And work your way backwards. So like, why am I here watching this video?
Yeah.
Because I feel stuck in my writing practice. Why do I feel stuck in my writing practice? Because I don't have enough time to write. Why don't I have enough time to write? Because like there's all this stuff going on at work. Why is all this stuff going on at work? And you just keep working your way backwards.
Yeah.
And and the story, the story keeps building and building. I mean, I've been very glib with like one sentence answers to those questions, but each of those questions has like really complicated answers. And you end up like noticing like whole things about your life just by continually like working your way backwards. And that's that sort of interrogation, that self-interrogation. And once you're able to do that, once you're able to see like how much history there is in like you're being here at this one single moment, and then realizing that that's true of everybody and everything, that it really helps you sort of like get back into the flow of noticing and contemplating those things in other people.
Yeah. And Justen, one of the things that I really admire about your sensibility and your work is that you're a writer, in my estimation, who really is able to both talk about the inner space that combines memories and personal experience, but also reacting to very specific, like almost like you've put yourself into adventures, so that's fueling the imagination and causing you to bear witness. I don't know if there's a question there.
Is there a question in there?
So to me, I think what one of the example you set is that it can be both ways. Someone that is deeply thinking about what moves them, or while you're writing, who knows what that's going to churn up. But also, it's an admonition to go on adventures, and I don't mean literally. I mean, I do mean literally, but live outside your head so that you can react to the world.
Well, I'll go back to your question about like what have I encountered, like the struggles that people have, and the thing of, I think Lisa kind of touched on it a little, is that they don't have anything to say, or what am I going to say? And so for me, I am a big proponent of prompts as well, because I think the one thing they do, among many things, but the one thing they do is break the silence of the page. So we no longer have to know what we're going to write. We already have something on the page. And, I talk about when I'm working with people, just developing our own kind of repetitive prompts. Like one I wrote for years, not years, but I did many writings on it, was, thank you for. That was the first thing I'd write at the top of my page when I started each morning. And so then, I'm giving thanks. So that already put me in a state of a place, where I was coming from, set a tone, but it also it gave me a start. I didn't have to think about what I was going to write. And it went, it could go anywhere from there. It could go on any adventure, have any kind of, it could play any kind of game it wanted. But to me, sitting sometimes with that blank page staring at you, or if you're working on a computer, just that, flashing cursor thing, like, what am I going to write? All that pressure. How do I start? The prompts alleviate where you start, what you're going to say. You could go on and write anything you want from it. You don't even have to follow the prompt. So that's what I would say, that,
Yeah.
just kind of giving yourself something to start with, so you don't have to even worry about what you're gonna say. Really good thing.
Mhm. Well, there's I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of variations on this, like, cliche, and I think I'm going to butcher it, but something along the lines of inspiration is great, but it's funny how inspiration happens more often when you're already writing. And I think there's so much, I certainly can attest to that. And for me, if I were to pinpoint, looking back, certainly like a conversion moment when I really bought into the notion of really trying to make the cultivation of a discipline and art a lifestyle, was when you look back and read something, whether it's prose or poetry, and you genuinely are like, I have no idea where that came from. To me, that's such an intoxicating, at once, of course, it's invoking kind of the mystery and the muse, but I think it's getting to the flow state that can happen. And I think, again, I'll use the word liberating, when you recognize that once you put thoughts down, we don't know what's going to happen, and tapping into the subconscious, like, how dare any of us assume we could know, especially for a longer project. I'm going to start at point A and end up at point Z. There's tons of writers that do that, but I've talked to a lot more writers that talk about, I have an idea of where I want to go, but the writing and the process might take me, in whole different directions. I think so that again, and we're talking about balance, it gets into the mystic, but I think it also demystifies, like, if you're able to let your subconscious run wild, you might be pleasantly surprised with what starts to happen.
Yeah, and that's just, kind of getting comfortable with sitting with yourself through, through the dailiness. One thing I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I don't know how much time we have, so I want to be sure to get it in, but
Yeah, we got
we,
time.
we're talking about practice, and writers, I feel like we take ourselves and our craft very seriously, and we're kind of like heavy about it. Like, I gotta write, it's not the work, we always go on about what hard, like we're defending that it's hard work, and it is difficult work. But if I did not say that I feel like in cultivating our practice, any practice, that the sense of play, there has to be a sense of play, that we need to, play like children play. It's open, it's flexible. We're taking cues from, different inputs that come to us, and we're able to go off in a different direction. Like, when we're, again, in that moment of honoring creation, to be receptive, to be playful. Yesterday I was playing the piano. Now, we never say I was playing writing, ever. We say I'm going to go play baseball, or I'm going to go play guitar, but we'd never say I'm going to go play writing. And I really wish we could start saying I'm going to go play writing, or I'm going to go play with language or something, to bring some fun. But yesterday I was playing piano, and usually I'll sit down and rehearse, I'll practice pieces that I'm trying to develop. But yesterday I just gave myself the time to play with the notes, to invent, and it was such a different experience. And I started to think about the writing too, as like, I get into my work sometimes and I'm just like crafting, or I'm editing. But what about those moments, if I could just allow myself that time to, like, really play with these blocks of letters, of words and letters, and sounds, and textures, and the scent, all the senses that words have as well. Like, so I say that just because if we only approach our writing as it's work, or it's going to, oh my gosh, I'm going to go down into the deep subconscious muck, and it's just going to be sad, and my life, blah blah blah. But if we could also bring at times this lightness of that playfulness is, and just like, how does this sound, these crazy words sound together, or what if I put these things together, how does that feel, so again, the inventiveness that can lead to just so many discoveries, not just for like discovering content, but discovering like how we like to work, discovering our own voice. So that's my 2 cents on play. I just think it's important to get it in.
Yeah, I think, like, I think we should all start saying, like, oh, I'm going to play with my manuscript, or I'm going to play with my book for a while. But two, like, I think it goes back to the thing that I was talking about a while back about, whenever you tell somebody you're a writer, right away they want to see the product. yeah, they expect that there is a, it's like, if you tell them, oh, I play the guitar, they don't necessarily say like, okay, play me something. But if you say you're a writer, it's like, where's your book? And we have this very, we've talked about this in previous conversations. It's a very market-driven capitalist notion of what success in the literary world means. That it boils down to product. And what the three of us are saying is that, I think in one way or another, the genuine success is in process. That the real, or maybe not success, the treasure of writing is in the process.
And fulfillment, I think, is another word that comes to mind. I think that's so true. When you say that, Ron, I think about, I spent a good more than a dozen years figuring out what I don't want to write. I started all these books that I didn't finish, and I'm glad I didn't finish them, because they were all things that, maybe I wanted to write pieces of it, but, basically these were books I didn't want to write. I thought I did at the beginning. Sure. But, some of the exploration is not just where you're going, but where you're not going. It's like, let me try this path. Oh, yeah, no, I think I'm going to go back over here. So I think it's such a commercial environment. We're taught to judge that and to hate that, right? And to fear that. But that's really a part of it too, I think, is just, I explored this and yeah, I'm done with it. I don't need to write a book about it. That's, and it's not worthy of a book, or at least right now, what I have to say about it isn't worthy of a book. So I love what you're saying about, letting go of that pressure that we get from society, because that is, when we can do that, we really are free. And that's when we can find that deeper fulfillment. And I think that when you do, often the success comes with that, right? Because then you're really in your authentic self and you're in authentic inquiry, and not just thinking about, well, what would the marketplace like me to say about this?
Right. Well, and we're talking about creating work that the author will be proud of and feel good about, regardless of how the world receives it. And again, it's part and parcel of making that a lifestyle, so that the writing is a lifestyle. We've only got a couple minutes left, but I wanted to give props to Ron, another quote of his, and maybe this is how we can, on a parting shot, just riff on. And I think we've already covered this, but Ron says, writing is comprised of a series of small victories. And I love that, because there's so many quotes we've already talked about that apply. But, Lisa, what you were just saying, like, I think for the non-artistic, it would almost seem like paradoxical, like working on a manuscript and putting it aside. That was a good thing. I think the commercial capitalist mind would be like, no, that's failure because you didn't finish. And it's all about this process and learning more about yourself and your craft simultaneously. Anyone want to talk about the notion of victory, these small victories leading to something more profound?
It kind of speaks for itself in a way.
Yeah.
In a way, I'm fighting against that word victory too, because it's it's polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of what we're talking about, and no offense, but part of what we're talking about, right, is like, let's stop judging, let's stop polarizing. So in a way, it's like, I don't know, I'm tempted to take the word victory out of it. And I'm tempted to take it out. I mean, I could see it. There is a victory there too. And there's a victory against, kind of the pressure, but maybe it's more of a surrendering, I guess, than a victory.
Yeah, and listen, I'll let Ron. I don't personally find, I hear you. I guess I mean it like victory against not writing, victory against self-doubt, victory against this notion that if this doesn't become a bestseller, I fail, all
Yeah,
of
yeah.
which are absolutely cultural constructions. So to me, it's more the personal victories. That's my
Yeah.
interpretation.
Yeah.
That's where I'm sure that's where I was going with it too. Like, and maybe accomplishment is a good word, good substitute there. But it's like, yeah, as I said at the beginning of the hour, every day we have a choice to write or not to write. Many times a day we have a choice to write or not to write, and anytime we make the choice to write, yeah, that's an accomplishment or a victory or an achievement or a great a great potential, a moment of great potential.
We've got a couple of minutes left. I want to thank each of you, and I will encourage everyone that's checking this out. There's so much more. We could have gone down any number of rabbit holes, which I personally would have enjoyed. But these three conduct workshops, have written books, have websites, are huge advocates for the craft. And what I really admire and appreciate and want to acknowledge is that they do this and set examples through their own work, but all of them are really doing a lot of lifting in the service of this community and trying to inspire people and help people be the best writers that they can be. So that's also what I think about when I think about these victories. It's this community of people that care and recognize that we all can inspire and encourage each other. So I think that's my key takeaway from everything that we've talked about. And it's a joyful process that, when cultivated, becomes a daily practice. So on that note, I will say this, to be continued. I thank you all for being here. I thank everyone for checking this out as part of 1455's 4th annual SummerFest. You can find out a lot more about us and what we do at 1455litarts.org. I thank you all very much, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.